This is an exciting panel. As you can see, we have a lot of people here, so we're going to dive right in. This is an event hosted by the Climate Resolute Coalition, and we're going to look at the co-benefits of climate and gender in both directions, and we'll end with a call to action and a gift for all of you. So before we get to the gift, I'm going to start over here with Leslie, and I could ask each of you to introduce yourselves one by one. Please, Leslie.
Thanks, Mill. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leslie Johnston. I'm the Chief Executive of Loudest Foundation based in Switzerland.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vupech Pilim-Lapesi. I'm the CEO and founder of an organic farm that produces strawberries in Zambia, and we are based in Lusaka, Zambia.
Good day, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I'm Mike Okorafor, and I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer for McCormick and Company. And I'm sure you know, we're the king of spices.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sashi Jayatilaka. I'm the Senior Climate Finance Advisor at USAID.
Andy Farrow, I lead Corporate Affairs and Sustainability at Mars. That is Mars, the company, and not the planet. Mars is the world's largest pet food company, confectionery company, and veterinary services company.
Thank you, Andy, for that clarification, because with the amount of noise...
It's always good to be clear.
Yeah, it's very good. Some of you may feel we're a little bit in outer space. We're in a built environment, and we've got lots of noise in the background, but we'll do our very best. So I'm going to dive right in, and I'm going to ask you, Bupe, if you could begin. I know that you are an entrepreneur in Zambia, and I know that you've been very successful. I know that you've had access to finance. I also know that you might want more finance. So if you could just speak to us briefly about the work that you're doing and the gender lens that you've applied. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mel. As I mentioned, we are an organic farm that produces strawberries in Zambia, in Lusaka province in particular. That's where we've started from. So basically what we went into is production of a healthy food product so that we are able to produce byproducts from strawberries that are healthy and in a healthy way to the environment and also to the human race. So what we've done is we've noticed in the past years climate change has really impacted our business in a very negative way. And what we've decided to do as a business for the past 10 years or so is to go into old practices that our parents and our forefathers used to use. They never used a lot of synthetic chemicals or fertilizers or stimulants to make the plant produce more or grow more. So they use typical methods, the natural way of compost, manure, and you decompose that and feed it to the soil. So that's what we've gone into, and we noticed that after we started that practice, that farming practice, we noticed that our production actually improved, our quality of product improved, and the way the consumers received that was totally overwhelming. And we're at a point now where we want to scale up and add to our value chain. We want to add to our product range. And we've started with a jam production, a pure strawberry jam production. And we've also gone into hydrating the fruit for processes of different dairy products, byproducts that use strawberries as raw material. So about 4 years ago, we went into now thinking, how do we make other women join us? How do we make other farmers join us? And I particularly took attention to women because I feel like we are the minority in our region. I'll speak about our region because I have seen this firsthand on the ground. We are the minority in Africa, in Zambia in particular. For a woman like me sitting here and talking about agriculture is somehow a taboo. But things are changing, cultures are changing, things are innovating, and now we've just seen this zeal in women taking up big businesses in agribusiness. So we decided to say, why not, engage them and try and train them into this practice that is healthy for the environment, healthy for the human consumption. So what we did is we went into training of these women, where we trained them how to heal the soil. So I've tagged my campaign towards healing the soil as a soil healing regeneration process, where we're able to go back to the land and heal it, because it's been depleted of so much minerals, resources that are natural to help the plant grow. So we've gone back now to heal the land. We start from the ground about 60 centimeters deep coming up. And we've trained more than 1,000 women at present, and we have a network of about 125, to be exact, women who are doing different agriculture businesses, where they're able to grow different crops and produce massive quality products using the practice that we're using. So we're really here at COP to actually add our voice and actually invite partners on board to help us amplify this message that the soil needs to be healed. The soil needs to be regenerated for us to produce something that is healthy for me, for you, and for the environment. So we're at a point where we want to amplify this message. We're able to go out there. As I mentioned, we are only currently operating in Lusaka province, and we have a total of 10 provinces in Zambia. And our age now is to go to all those provinces and hopefully end up in other countries as well. So we are here to add that voice and also soak in as much information as possible to help us innovate and stay relevant in the business.
Great.
Thank you.
I have so many questions for you, but I'll circle back to you in a minute about the finance piece, and that's something we're going to touch on with all of you. But Michael, I'm going to turn to you now. I know McCormick, as you say, the king of spices. If you visit Baltimore, you will smell their company before you find their company. That dominates the entire Inner Harbor in Baltimore. Could you say, I know you're working directly with your producers on climate smart agriculture and things like that. So could you just paint a picture for us about the work that you're doing with your suppliers, please? And in how many countries? Because I know it's quite a few. Thanks.
Thank you. Mel, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, Mel, this is really a good question. First of all, thanks for that kind introduction. But to put it in perspective, McCormick sources from over 85 different countries, different spices and herbs. For instance, most of our vanilla comes from Madagascar. Most of our black pepper comes from Vietnam. All of our oregano comes from Turkey. All of our red pepper comes from India. Our ginger comes mostly from Nigeria and a few other countries. What do you think these countries have in common? They are all in the global south, okay? And if you want to talk about climate change, they're feeling the brunt of it. And you know what is interesting? They didn't cause it. If you look at the global side, they didn't contribute to that. We did over here in the Western world. So here's what we're doing at McCormick that is very important. We enshrined it into our business strategy because we believed that the era of CSR is over. You have to embed it in your business if you're going to do it day in, day out, and that's what we've done. And there's one simple principle in our purpose-led performance, which is that we have to deliver top-tier financial performance while doing the right thing for our people, our communities, and the planet we all share. But more importantly is to build an enduring supply chain. Let me tell you what we're doing in the communities. It's communities where we live, communities where we work, but most importantly, communities where we source. Like in Madagascar, just like Bupe has said. You got to make sure that those communities are healthy. Otherwise, you won't have an enduring supply chain. And if you don't have an enduring supply chain, we won't have all these good spices and herbs that we sell, and there'll be no business. But we're trying to future-proof that. How are we doing that? One of the things we've done is we've created what we called McCormick Women Empowerment Framework, okay? And we didn't do that because we're experts in women. No, we hired CARE International. If you know anything about women, gender empowerment, you got to talk to CARE. And so we hired CARE. They went into those communities in Vietnam, Madagascar, in India, Indonesia, Turkey, and really understood why women are being held back. Bupe is correct. Just for transparency, I grew up in one of those communities, an eastern part of Nigeria. My mom was a subsistence farmer. And I was sharing earlier, I wouldn't be here today without that woman, because my father died when I was 4 years old. I was the youngest of 4 children. And even at this stage, I can tell you that I'm still the least successful amongst my siblings, raised by a single woman. Okay? She refused to remarry, and Bupe will tell you, it's customary when you're young and your husband dies, because the men usually are older than their wives. And when they die, they remarry. My mom refused to remarry. And that she sent me to an all-boys Catholic boarding secondary school. And that changed the trajectory of my own life. And that is where I'm here today. So when I talk about what we're doing at McCormick, there is a simple thing Africans know. And that is, if you empower a woman, you empower a community. We used to call it village. I'm using community so you guys can relate to it. You empower a community and you advance a nation. So here's what we've done at McCormick. We realized that in most of our farms, where we don't own those, these are individual mom and pop, like they own that, they produce it. And so we realized that most of the farms were owned by men, like me. Most of the workers were women. And so we said, that's unfair. So that's the work that CARE did for us, revealed some of the issues, and one of them was finance for them to start. So we partnered with IFC, which most of you know is part of the World Bank, and we created a village savings and loan for a place like Madagascar and Vietnam. In the case of Madagascar, we gave the women, took the loan to start their own business. Vanilla is like gold, you remember that? And so we, McCormick, paid the interest up front. And the women took the loan, and some men took as well. But they started their business, and when they sold the crop, they paid back the loan without the interest. And that changed their business. And today, those communities, I went down there before the COVID incident. I went down there, they were thriving. They were so happy they gave me a wrapper. Most Africans will understand what I'm talking about. And they were so happy about that. Now, why am I telling you this? Because if you look at these women now, they can afford to send their kids to school, like my mom did. They can afford to follow what I call sustainable farming practices. We have what we call McCormick Grown for Good. So it's about doing the right things on the farm, building community resilience, having women work and own their own, and then ethical supply chain. So in those communities, you don't have child labor because the kids are going to school because the parents can afford to pay for them to go to school. There is no free education in most of those farming communities. If you can't afford to pay, your kids don't go to school. Okay? So that is what is happening. But here's the thing. These women are practicing sustainable practices that we're talking about, regenerative practices. Let me give you an example. In Madagascar, most of you, even people in McCormick, most of you won't realize that vanilla is an orchid. What is the biggest thing that an orchid needs? Shade, thank you, and a host plant. They don't crawl on the ground, they host plant, and that's where the thing grows and the bean comes. What is the biggest carbon sink in the world today, natural? Trees. It's very simple. So you have a situation where the thing needs a cover, and then it's soaking in carbon dioxide, it's a carbon sink, and then it's growing healthy. Guess what? Higher yield, better consistent quality, and this is what these women are doing and preserving the thing. We're also planting trees around that and encouraging biodiversity. I said that if you want to really talk about climate action, you got to make sure you engage these women that are doing the work so they can do it right and preserve the planet. And I think, Bupe, you highlighted that. So thank you.
Yes, we did.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Well, this is the perfect time to interject. We're going to go from this on-the-ground perspective and broaden it out. And Andy, I'm going to turn to you in a minute. But the real thing that this panel is so important is because this is the second time that the Climate Resolute Coalition has come together to do such a discussion. Because if you think about everything that's happening in the green zone, the blue zone, and even right in this building, everyone's going to be very focused on decarbonizing. And they may be very focused on technology. When you know that the research says that applying a gender lens is one of the top solutions to climate change, you look at the way all of these events are constructed, you won't hear it. You will not hear that gender equity is among the top solutions to climate change. So the work that we're doing in the coalition, and Mars was one of our first 3 members, and we thank you for that, is to really put that spotlight on that intersectional thinking, why it matters, and making sure that everyone understands that if you focus on decarbonizing, without also then thinking about all the ways we as countries are recarbonizing, you're not going to win. I think of it as a bucket. You've got a bucket that you're trying to empty, but at the same time, because of rampant population growth and other things, poor agricultural practices, women's disempowerment, all of that is a way of recarbonizing. So if you don't do the two at the same time, you're not going to win the fight. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn to you. I know Mars is doing a lot of work on livelihoods, climate change, and women's empowerment, and you've done them over the years in bits and pieces, but now I see a lot of leadership on integrating them. Could you say a bit more about what you're up to these days? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, people know us best for our brands, you know, M&M's, you know, Snickers, you know, Pedigree, we're organic. But in reality, we're an agricultural company. And so we are taking, for most of our business, we are taking agricultural products, which we get from around 100 countries. The land area the size of Belgium is producing crops for our business, and we turn them into consumer goods. We are very dependent on smallholder agriculture for a lot of them, and if you look at the future of farming, it is increasingly female. And so if you want, from a pure narrow business point of view, if you want security of supply, you need to look after farmers. You need to make it attractive to farm for the long term. Otherwise, you're not going to have the core raw materials you need for their products. And then if you then take that to the next level, we have shareholder objectives, rather like Michael does, around climate, around getting down to net zero, but also improving the lives of a million people within our value chain. And increasingly, as we looked at it, I think there is a real danger, and the real danger is that when people very much focus on targets, it becomes very segmented. And it's all about this target or that target. And the reality is that lots of them, particularly in agriculture, go together. You can't just think about water. You need to also think about climate. You need to think about gender. And we have certainly seen that, and our assessment is that for climate mitigation resilience to work, you need to empower women. And where we have done projects, whether it be in East Africa, in Nairobi, within a sort of a more of a route to market chain, or whether it be in West Africa, also with CARE, where you have 50,000 women involved in savings and loans programs, or it's some of the work we're doing with USAID in Indonesia on agroforestry. It has a multiplier effect. It makes things far more powerful. It broadens the impact, because we're not just interested in solving a climate problem or a water problem or a poverty problem or a gender empowerment problem. They need to be solved together for us. And so that's very much why and I think all of those things is one nobody has all the answers to. We certainly don't have all the answers to. But it needs to be looked at in a completely new light in the way, and it's one of the reasons in our sourcing program, and the biggest difference we can probably make is in terms of how we source raw materials. And so when we look at the programs for sourcing, we're not just looking at quality and cost and carbon, we're looking also at gender and how that factors into all of the programs, and so that our aim is to buy things in a completely different way. And if you look at part of the problem is that most companies procure commodities, and that is suggesting that everything is equal. A strawberry is a strawberry is a strawberry, regardless of how it's grown, regardless of where it comes from, regardless of what the externalities of it are. And that's how business has operated for hundreds of years. And so it needs a fundamental rethink in how we buy. And it's not easy because there are very, very long supply chains. We don't own farms. You're having to do it through many different layers. And so it's about really aligning incentives across the whole of that to really deliver impact.
Thank you. I wanted to make that point. Actually, there was a research, somebody did the research to show that gender cross-cuts as many as 11 of the Sustainable Development Goals, and it pops up in all of them, hence why we're here. And Sashi, I'm going to turn to you in a second. I know just last week that you announced a major new partnership at USAID with Amazon, the Climate Gender Equity Fund, or I may be misgetting that, so I'll let you take it from here and describe that and tell us more, please.
Sure. Before I get to the positive side, I do want to be honest that the reason that we're all here, and it's so exciting to have so many companies that are being forward-leaning and an example of an entrepreneur doing this. But frankly, before we came together with this partnership, we did research for the last year. And we talked to many donors, we talked to companies, we talked to finance firms. And sadly, when it comes to climate finance, very few people are actually looking at how that finance trickles down to in terms of a gender responsive way. Gender lens investing has now been around shortly for like 3-4 years. It isn't that long. So, you know, we're trying to push companies to look at not just how to be investing in women-led businesses, but now we're looking at the climate nexus. And frankly, nobody wants to do that because it doesn't equal profit. So the fact that climate change can have such a negative impact, it exacerbates all the social and economic inequalities of the world now. And women and gender are at the heart of who takes the brunt of that, whether it's conflict, a drought. You know, if you imagine in your head, you see the news, what's happening, guess who's taking care of the families when a flood happens? You know, like a third of Pakistan is underwater. It's the moms taking care of them. And then they also have to provide. So, but in terms of how we respond, it's very complicated. Like you mentioned, we don't have systems funding. We have siloed funding. We have our agriculture funding, we have our climate change funding, and then we have our, you know, economic growth funding over here, or gender responsive funding. And so after we did this research, we thought we need to do something that's building the nexus across the board. Unfortunately, we had Amazon approach us with the same idea. So it's very good timing, fortuitous. Maybe you all had something to do with getting this momentum out there, because we were surprised that we thought we were alone in seeing this nexus, and now clearly there's a few others that think this. I don't think this is normal, so I just want to say that's not normal to have this many companies talking about having supply chain climate risk and the effect of gender on that. So we came together and we thought through how can we broaden this and make this something that might be a partnership that takes one example and can actually help you scale with other partners. And so we decided, okay, we should just essentially start a fund this year that would be focused on investing in gender responsive activities in terms of climate. So that, what does that mean? It could be everything from a business like Bupes, but also it could be women's organizations in these countries that are trying to access funding from the GCF. So we're starting with $6 million, $3 million from Amazon, $3 million from USAID. But then the nice part is that Amazon has an investment fund that they're adding $50 million into for climate technology companies that are women-led. And the goal is in 5 years to get to $60 million with partners like those of us here. So hopefully next year we might all be on the same stage talking about something we're doing together. So.
Well, let's hope. And I should also point out that Amazon joined the Climate Resolute Coalition in June, and we were very happy to have them, and we're happy to hear you today talking, because you're right, you do feel alone. There are many people in the audience that I recognize that I know are working on their piece of this particular story, and we are seeing an increase in momentum. So with that, Leslie, I'm going to turn to you, and I know that the Loudest Foundation, and I'm so happy that we have a diversity of views here. We have companies, we have thankfully, we have a philanthropist, we have the government agencies. Say more about, I know you've done work on climate, I know you've done work on gender, I know you've increasingly done now more intersectional work, and could you say not only more about what you're doing specifically, but why this matters, this intersectionality? Thanks.
Sure, thank you, Mil. And yeah, I think I'm representing philanthropy, which is the result of the success of business, because I think some of that does go into fueling more philanthropic ventures. And for us, I mean, we're only 3 years old, and when we launched in early 2020, it was very much driven on the belief that business and industry can be a force for good in terms of how we tackle what we call both the climate and inequality crisis, this dual crisis, and philanthropy can be a catalyst. But if we're going to do that, especially looking at the deeply rooted social inequities in our world, we need to have a gender intersectional lens in everything we do. Now, that's easier to do when you work in, say, the fashion industry. That's one of our industry verticals we work in. Of course, most of the workers in fashion in the garment factories are women. You know, the work that we do to make sure that, you know, at a minimum does no harm, but at a maximum can empower and really help these women be agents of change. I'd say that's relatively easier to do because it's visible and it's something we have a lot of programming around. What's harder is to think about how do you bring an intersectional lens to an industry like the built environment? We're working in buildings. Buildings are kind of complicated. You know, you build it, it's there for 60 years. It's a very fragmented industry. It's a very financialized industry. And where does gender come into that? And there are supply chains in buildings. Think of, there's a lot of issues around forced and bonded labor. But when you're looking at the building itself, no one thinks about when you decarbonize a building, which needs to happen because it's 40% of emissions, what happens to the people who live in those buildings? You know, what if someone is a single mother struggling to pay the rent, maybe just lost her job, and suddenly the building's retrofitted and the rent shoots up by 50%? You know, so there's issues of social equity that actually disproportionately hit women, and more than women. I think the intersectional lens comment you made before is really important. We're not just talking about gender, we're talking about sexuality, disability, race, etc. This is a bigger thing. And that for us was really important to bring that into everything that we do. And it wasn't easy. And I think, I mean, it's great to hear how companies are doing this. I mean, this is hard stuff. And I think what we've done as a foundation is we've actually invested a lot in our own capability to learn about this. We've had learning partnerships with, say, our finance and capital markets team to say, hey, how do we incorporate a gender lens in work that's trying to transform capital markets? Where do you start? You know, so I think we've spent a lot of time helping ourselves understand that so that we could then help industries move the needle a bit more.
Yeah. Thanks, Leslie. And one of the objectives of the Climate Resolute Coalition is, in fact, to bring in that learning, that sense of learning, community of practice, sharing what's working and what isn't working, but also to really begin piloting ideas such that we can market test a few things and then turn them over to the donors and the financiers and the so on. So speaking of finance, Bupe, I wanted to ask you, what was that journey for you to get the financing that you got originally that really, I think, had a catalytic effect on your work? And also, I believe that you are one of the early pioneers that's the member of a wider network. And if you could say more about that institution, I'll let you be the one to announce it since it's your baby. I don't want to do anything, so
Yeah.
please, go ahead.
Thank you, Ma. In partnering with an organization like the Rallying Cry,
That's the one.
RTC for short, you know, it's very difficult to get any kind of capital injection into a business without collateral, without any backup from big firms and all sorts of organizations. And then you get to be in touch with an organization like the Rallying Cry, whereby they're able to look at your business and see the value in your business. And then they're able to see your journey and see where it's going to go next. So the simple thing they asked me is like, what do you want to do next? What do you want to do? What is your dream? Where do you want to see your company go? Where do you want to see your business go? And of course, every business person has goals. They have a lined up 5-year plan and all sorts of things. And in my business, I just had these stages and phases of my business that I would want to do to innovate so that I'd stay relevant in the business. I also stay in business and expand on my product range. So one of them was the dehydration. We needed a dehydration machine to make sure that, first of all, we had a lot of wastage of our fresh fruit because not everybody is consuming the strawberries fresh. Some of them would want them dehydrated for processing, and others would want them in powder, and they would want a shake, or so. There's a wide range of a product range. So we had to categorize and say, what do we start with first? So we first started with the jam production, which we're still scaling up at present. And then the next stage, because of the huge market space and market share and opportunities that came along. You know, I was making the RTC team laugh. I was like, I signed an agreement to sell dehydrated fruit without actually having a dehydration machine. And you know, it was so funny. And then come this partnership with the RTC, and they come on board and said, okay, where do we move you next? You know? And I'm like, dehydration machine, now, you know? And they were able to come through for us, and we're glad to say we reported back to our potential client and said, we're able to give you 40 tons of dehydrated fruit because we have this going. So really, it's my story that is a story of every woman-led business in the agribusiness in Africa, in southern region, in Zambia, whereby we are very good producers, very, very good, excellent organic producers. But we need to scale up to go to the next stage. How does my jam come to you in the US? How do you access my Farm 23 strawberry Zambia product in the US? So that I'm able to have opportunities of a wider market space. So if finances can be channeled towards that, and you put your faith in a woman-led business, he explained it so well. If you empower me as a woman, you empower the whole village. That's a saying in Africa, and it's something that we live by every day, you know. And I was just sharing with the panel before we sat here. I was saying, look, 80% of my staff are women. And you can only imagine what that pay they get in a month is able to do for their families in a small way, but it's making a difference. So what if I'm able to expand and employ more women? So when you're talking about impact, of how do we impact the environment, it's firstly by empowering a business like myself into empowering 80% of the women who are also able to empower their families, and their families empower them. Here's a good example. He went from a former producer, woman, to what he is now, leading a very big corporation and doing amazing things. So all that is through a woman being empowered. So I feel like we have a lot of potential in Africa where we need capital injection that is able to boost us up. So we're at that stage where we're ready. We're ready for investment. We're ready to go in. We're ready to expand. And we want to see ourselves out there. You know, I think it's time for the women.
Amen.
I heard an amen. Okay, wonderful. Well, not to step on the heels of an amen, but I am. So I'm going to open it up just a little bit and ask sort of, this could be for Andy and Michael, but if you look at this stage, you see this like a I've used this analogy too many times, but there's like a multi-layer cake. In America, I even found a photograph of a 6-layer cake, and I wanted it to be a rainbow to show each of the layers of what women's empowerment does, innovation and team performance and negotiation. And I thought, could there be a cake with 6 different colors? Well, in America, yes, there is. There's a blue layer and a red layer and so on. So when you think of all the layers of how this intersects, so I know, Andy, you and Michael are already partnering, and USAID, you're partnering with Amazon. I know Amazon is also beginning to partner more with some of its suppliers, like the Marses and the Mondeleses of the world. But because we're fortunate to have an SME here from Zambia, how do people like you find people like Bupe? And vice versa, Bupe, how do you find people like them? In other words, let's be very mechanical when we say we need more partners. Can any of you address what it takes to find them? Let's be practical about it. Thanks.
And you want me to go? All right. So, first of all, before I address that, I think we also need to be transparent in what is happening here. Andy works for Mars. I work for McCormick. You know, if you look at it, it's not easy to get big companies, CPGs, to be partners. But I'm pleased to tell you, when it comes to climate, Mars and McCormick and PepsiCo started what we call SLOT, which stands for Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition. And why did we do that? Because we had the same problems. Today, that Supplier Leadership on Climate Transition has more than 20 CPGs as members now. Big companies like Coke, like Nestle, okay? And this is what is more interesting. Over 500 suppliers have been trained because of climate. And the reason we did that was because we realized that in case of McCormick, 95% of our carbon footprint is in the scope 3. Do you know what that means? That's things we can't control. Okay? And Andy's firm, Mars, the same thing. PepsiCo, the same thing. Coca-Cola, the same thing. So when you talk about that, we've created this, and we actually invested money upfront. The three companies were the convening companies, McCormick, Mars, and PepsiCo. We invested money to train our suppliers. You know what is interesting? Some of the suppliers were supplying to all three of us, and even all 20 of us now. So that money was a catalyst. We've trained them. We've gone through the 4th season now. Over 500 suppliers now have a plan to decarbonize. Some of them had no strategies. Andy will tell you when we started this, you tell them scope 3, what is that? Is that how I cook my food? No, they don't get it. But we hired Guidehouse, a consulting company, to train them on how to set their own their decarbonization strategies and how to get their scope 1, 2, and 3 and all those things. I say that because you asked a very interesting question. So obviously, we're not a charity, okay? We're a business. So if you go to a remote place like Madagascar or Vietnam or India, we're looking for people that will make the crops that we sell. In our own case, it's herbs and spices. We're the king of flavor everywhere. And so what we do is we go to those villages, because I'll give you one example. Cinnamon. Most people don't know that cinnamon is the bark of a tree. I don't know what they think it is. You know where it grows? In the Amazon-type jungles. And historically, that's where you have a good example of slash and burn. They cut the trees, they burn them, other kind of thing, and they grow again. And you're damaging the environment. But with the kind of thing we're doing, we're teaching those farmers something that is allowing them to do useful things. For instance, if you let the cinnamon tree mature, which takes about 15 years, 13 to 15 years, you can now scrape the bark and it will regenerate. If you harvest it prematurely, it will die. This is simple science. But those people who weren't practicing it, we taught them that. So guess what? These farmers are now helping us, to create even bigger carbon sink, like the Amazon type of thing, which is where the cinnamon tree. I use that as an example to say, when you identify such a community, you know what is interesting? Their ancestors used to do what we're trying to do with regenerative agriculture. Rupe just said it. It's going back to the land. And what is happening is, by doing it, they're getting more yield, and they're making more money. And guess what? People, the young children now want to go back and run their family businesses in the village, because these are family members, their parents are driving their own cars and feeding them and paying the tuition. That, to me, is how you identify and help it. And maybe I'll pass it to Andy, because cocoa is a good example, too.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, we are getting closer and closer to the farm. We didn't grow up with that was not the route, and so we're essentially trying to either partner with people in that supply chain or ourselves get closer and closer to it. We're quite focused on it. We're looking at sort of 8 key raw materials, and we have key countries, key programs, and through the next generation sourcing that I talked of earlier is. You're looking at sourcing where you're sourcing not just for cost and quality. You're looking for sourcing at a whole range of things, and we know we need to do it because it's the only way that you get resilience there. And so it really is about partnering. And sometimes with some suppliers, it's going to mean in the end, you have to say, you know what? You're not moving in the way that we need you to move. We want to help you. Want to help you get to the right place. And we know when we look at the sort of the products, the things that we're buying, it's rare that you just have one issue. It's rare that it's just an environmental issue, or it's just a human rights issue, or it's just a poverty issue. It's normally all of those combined. And so we are working through that lens. We started something called the Farmer Income Lab a few years ago, and the depressing thought on that, I think they looked through 100 different interventions that companies had done and found that only 3 of them had actually worked. Just we're at the infancy on this. We've had double entry bookkeeping brought to us by the Benedictine monks in the 13th century. And so finance is really quite well practiced now. We're at the start of doing stuff around sustainability and really at the very start of connecting it all together. But the problem is we can't wait 500 years to do it, and we've got to move much more quickly on it.
So Mills, before you go,
Yeah.
I want to amplify one point that Andy started to make. And that is, it's very simple. If you want to end child labor in farming communities, you have to empower the women to run their farms and make enough money. I gave a talk at the ILO conference in Durban earlier this year, and everybody was talking about child labor. You go and inspect the factory so that if you make sure there's no child in there. Who is that dumb to have a child working on the factory when you're coming for an inspection? Exactly. You are doing the wrong thing. If you want to get rid of, end child labor, there's something women have in common. All of them. And I apologize to all of you women here. You know what they have in common? They want their children to be successful. I don't care whether you are a CEO woman, you are a peasant woman, they all want their children to be successful. I just gave an example of my mom, wasn't educated, but look at what she produced in 4 children. So the point I'm making, you want to talk about child labor, all these things we're talking about, empower a woman. That's how you empower a village. That's how you advance a nation. And I think that's where Andy was going. I just want to make sure I emphasize that.
If I may, I was going to
Yeah, I was going to turn to you anyway, so that works out. And then after that, everyone hold. We're going to take 1 or 2 questions, and we're going to end with a call to action, and we're going to do all of that in 15 minutes. So
Yeah.
please.
I think it's important to highlight, though, it's not common that companies have this way of approaching their employees in the countries that we work in. Traditionally, to have this kind of change, to empower the women, it means the men who are in the in-between of your company and the employees who run those middle-income those middle businesses, they have to be willing to empower the women or make it gender responsive. In other words, friendly to mothers who might have children. And I will be honest, that is highly uncommon in all of the supply chains, right? So while Mars and McCormick might have a corporate policy, getting it to the stage where they then reach women like Bupe is not easy and is not as simple as, so it's a good question. I think it's not one that we've solved. That is one of the things we want to learn more about, is how we can ensure that behavior change happens throughout a supply chain and how we can hold companies accountable. So it's important that you do this, because then you're sending a signal to your supply chain of what's important. But just like you said, when you have someone come in to inspect child labor, even if you say you have a certain standard, when you go to visit your companies, they may not. So we also do have to work with NGOs that are looking at the role of women and having women empowered in those NGOs and civil society. And they can also help us keep businesses in the countries we work in accountable.
Yeah. Fantastic point. Leslie, please, and then I'm going to turn it over to the group.
I actually feel a little, you hear me? I feel a little uncomfortable with the language here, because I think the talk of empowering women kind of is not the point. The point is to create the conditions so women can empower themselves, and that actually starts with men. And so a lot of work that we're doing is to create allies out of men. People sort of think we focus on the women, but we need to focus on everyone. Everyone has a role to play. And I know you're doing that, but I think it's important that we're clear with language on what we mean there.
That's an excellent point. I really appreciate that. And the other thing is, I do a lot of work in some very remote communities, some of them very religious and so on. And what I found is that when we put this in the frame of, say, a women's rights agenda, and we don't keep it as an everyone agenda, it doesn't go quite as far. But when you get it to the point of, this is our all hands on deck moment, especially when you see that some say we have 5 years to get this right on climate, and then you see UN Women and others saying that gender equity or gender equality is 300. Thank you for the Benedictine monk example, because at this rate, it's going to be the Benedictines who bring us gender equality. But seriously, if you think about the disconnect between that timeline, which could be hundreds of years off, and the climate urgency, which is now, keeping it in that planetary human focus, I found the audiences to be more receptive. So with that, the audience topic, We have time for one, maybe two questions. We have a runner. Jeanette, I'll take a question from you first and see if we can get another. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Very encouraging to hear all of what you're saying. I run an organization called Women Organizing for Change in Agriculture and Natural Resource Management. My question to all of you, and particularly here at the COP with the focus on climate, there's a lot of distrust of companies. There's a lot of claims of greenwashing. I'll say there may be claims of pinkwashing. How are you measuring your impact? How do we really know that you're doing something that enables women's empowerment?
Let me just say this. You know, numbers don't lie. And if you can't track, you can't measure, you can't do anything, right? So one of the things we committed, remember I talked about our strategy called Purpose-Led Performance? We source from over 85 different countries, individual farmers. These are not corporations. And so we said by 2025, we set this strategy in 2017. And we said by 2025, we will build resilience and impact 35,000 farmers. Okay, that's a commitment. There is no greenwashing there. That's a commitment. You can look it up from 2017. As I speak today, we've reached and impacted and improved the livelihood of 23,000 farmers on our journey to 35,000 by 2025. That's how you do it. You put a number, you commit to it, and you want people to measure it. That's one. The second point is we didn't do this because we're experts on how to do it. We've partnered with CARE International, with WWF, with NCBA CLUSA. In the case of women, it was CARE International and NCBA CLUSA. And why was that? Because we believe this. These NGOs are the moral compass of this journey we call sustainability. If you're going to do a sustainable living without them, good luck. And so they are the moral compass. They keep us honest. And I can tell you we've learned a lot of things from them.
I mean,
Just a
I
second.
would, on the greenwashing, I mean, the interesting thing, the people who get asked the greenwashing question are always actually the people who are doing things. Which is, I think, is always slightly ironic. I mean, how are we doing it? Well, first of all, it's a shareholder objective. It's integrated into our financial planning system, so our business units have to tell us exactly where they are going to get to on the several key metrics and the shareholder objectives on a 3-year cycle, and then we remunerate our top 300 leaders against it. So it is an absolute core of doing business. What I would say is the work on social metrics is really poor. The work that can give you a true aggregate social metric in the same way that you can from on climate or on water, you know, it really, it's not there. If it has, please give it to us. And we have targets on improving the lives of 1 million people in our supply chain by 2030. We're at about 450,000. I think, if I'm honest, I think it compares apples and pears. It's good. It's counting things. It's demonstrating progress, and then all the programs we run, we set targets for them. We set targets within our sourcing thing. So I think we are taking it serious. I actually think you need more business involvement because this needs to move to. I think if we leave COP to the governments, I think we'll make as much progress in the next 10 years as we made in the last 10.
It's a very powerful way. Now, wow, this is exciting. We have no time and lots of questions. So Bupe, hold on 1 second. I'm going to take your question, please. And then we're going to go back to you. And for anyone who doesn't get their questions answered, I know a few of us can stay later and we will get to you all. So please.
Yeah, so my name is Surina Nirula. I've worked for 30 years, beginning with street children, with women, women empowerment. I was on the board of Plan International. I've worked with CARE. I've worked with a number of organizations, and now I'm working with Television for Environment, and we make films on the environment. So my question is, I have seen a lot of work with women, tried to make a difference, done a lot of advocacy, and actually nothing works. When you go down at that level, men are still ruling, you know, there's nothing happening. Now I think that to move forward, man is a selfish animal. We need to do something to entice them to make a difference to women. Have you all thought of digital currency so that it's all goes down and it's very transparent? Has anybody thought about paying them in digital currency?
Using financial technology?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is kind of the intention of how we want to use the work with Amazon's Climate Pledge Fund, is looking at technology that might not just fin technology, not just digital currency, but I do think when there's income coming in, and if the income, sometimes sadly it is the income comes in through the woman, but it's controlled by the man. Sometimes it's the other way around, but sometimes that helps change dynamics in households. We have also seen it affect households negatively, so I'm not going to say income makes a positive impact, but we are hopeful that at the bottom of all of this, that we're helping livelihoods, and digital currency is one way. FinTech is now thriving throughout the world, but again, how you use that to then transfer into household impact, going to your point on social measurement, it's still not a problem we've solved.
Okay. So before the questions, Bupe, you had something you wanted to add, and then I'm going to take one more question, please.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was listening very carefully, especially to Michael and Andy, when they were talking about these initiatives that they've initiated where they're able to reach out to farmers and all. For me, I think basically organizations like yourselves, you need to come to the ground. You need to listen to the producer, because for you to stay in business, you need that producer. So if you listen to the challenge of the producer and what they need on the ground, and the quality of what you need from them will come out. So if you go to the ground and speak to this woman who's producing your cinnamon, your vanilla, and ask them, what is your challenge? How can I get the best from you? I think that's the approach that I would love to see from corporations like yourselves. The approach where you're able to go to the ground. I've heard so many figures and so much money being put on the table in initiatives that are going to help produce good product for you to stay in business. I've heard so much throughout the COP. And what I'm yet to hear deep is, how do you come to me in Lusaka, in Makeni, at my farm, and come and tell me, I need you to produce this so that I'm able to stay in business. So for me, the impact is you getting to the ground.
Let me just address that, because it's what is
1
this
minute.
Is, this
I'm
is
gonna cut
less than 1 minute.
Good.
You know, this is right. If you can't talk to the people that are doing the work, you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
And what we've done is, not just us going to the farm, but CARE that understands women issues going with us. That's how we created the McCormick Women Empowerment Framework. Very well said.
Okay, thank you. I saw, there's so many. Please, with the green lanyard, if you could go. Yeah, thanks. And then we're going to wrap up. Yep.
I'm hoping this is both a comment and a question, but we'll see how it comes out. I keep reading the title over and over, and I'm trying to process. I'm a female in the C-suite in a startup, and I'm the only one, as you can imagine. I think it's rare to see this many females on a panel. I'm sure it was intentionally really a focus, but as you mentioned, looking at COP, is that what you're normally seeing? And so I guess my question to you is, how can we attack this in the supply chain when we really need to attack this in leadership? Because in some ways, if your leadership understands this, then it is easier to bake it into your business decisions and bake it into the business strategy. And so I guess the question is, do you all feel that it's a top-down challenge as much as it is a bottom-up challenge in getting leadership to have the diversity that you're expecting in the supply chain?
Based on what I heard you saying, Andy, about how this is baked into your metrics and performance evaluations and everything, I mean, I don't know if you have an answer to that, but
I mean, I would
please.
say you've got to do both. So we've
Yeah,
got strong targets around gender balance and diversity, equity, inclusion within the business, and we're probably about halfway there on gender. We're not the full way there on gender. I don't think you can wait till you've got where you need to be from a leadership point of view and say, okay, when we've done that, will you do that? And I also, controversially, don't believe that would actually solve the problem, because you actually need to make it a business metric in terms of how you do business. You need to integrate it into how you operate. And I don't think that makes much difference, the balance of the leadership team. Maybe if it's more gender balanced, you'll get there quickly enough. I've not seen any data that says that you increase female leadership, and that solves all the problem in a giant scope 3 extended supply chain. I'm not sure that. So I think they're both good things. They're both important to do, but you can't say we do one and then they do the other.
Yeah, I would only agree with that. And I'm just going to we're going to do a rapid fire call to action. And by rapid, I mean in under a minute. So Leslie, if I could ask you to begin, and then when we finish the call to action, we're going to discuss these. Go.
Thank you. So who here is from business? Okay, good. So this is a call for you all. So based on our work as Loudus, I think there's 4 things that we think are really important for business to do, and it's great to hear that these things are happening. The first one is indeed understanding the issues. I think, Andy, you had said get closer to the topic. That's really critical. It's really important also to understand that representation does not equal empowerment. So we have partners, for example, that create stewards of the soil, of the water, of women in the villages, and there's different models out there to really create true stewardship and empowerment. So that's number 1. I'd say number 2, and what Michael was saying, is work with other organizations who know what they're doing. Because most companies don't have those local connections. You need to work with the local grassroots organizations. They have the context. We do a lot of work with organizations in India where they actually create women leaders from the local communities that are bringing fellow women along, and that is very powerful. I think number 3, walk the talk. So the question there was about women in leadership. You have no credibility as a business if you're trying to work on your supply chain and then you look at your board and it's all, old white guys. Sorry, you really need to look at your governance, your leadership, and your commitment to gender equity and inclusion internally. And I think finally, use your market power as companies to push for making what is voluntary mandatory. I think, as you said, this is amazing to be with these companies who've done so much, but there are a lot of companies that are laggards. So we need legislation, and we need these emerging standards under mandatory human rights due diligence to incorporate gender dynamics as well.
Got it. Thank you. Bupe, please. A minute or less.
Okay, thank you. I feel we need more investment in the women innovation. We need to understand what the women producer needs. We need to get to the point of their need, those that they're able to produce to what these big corporations need. So mine is basically skill development. We need skill development. We need a lot of training. We need a lot of innovative technology on how we do our business, especially in the agribusiness. How do we innovate? How do we stay relevant? I think some of them, those are the most important things I would want. So investment should be channeled towards the right cause.
Got it. Thank you. Michael.
I'm going to keep it simple because these people are more eloquent than I am. It's very simple. If you want to have an enduring business, think of this. It's about doing well by doing good, period.
Thank you.
I would just want to plus up everything Leslie said. I think you can't underscore the complicated needs of governance, both at the international policy level, at the state level, and then at the corporate level, all the way to the entrepreneur level. So governance is often seen as not sexy, but is actually critical for long-term change. But then to Bupe's point, I do think we need more investment, and I do think we need more than just companies making commitments, and I'm not pointing at those here, but looking deeper and making a commitment that puts their money where their comments are. And so I would say building out our partnership that we've started with Amazon would be my call to action on the Climate Gender Equity Fund. And so welcome to start here on this stage, but also hopefully we can have Bupe and have your wishes of next year having at least grown by 1 or 2 provinces. But there's so many more women like you in Africa, in Asia. I know this is not, you're not an anomaly, but getting to finding you is hard. And I actually think we do need grants. So to your point on skills, we don't get there without the grants.
I would 3 things. I think for the companies out there, you need to know. You need to know and understand your supply chain, and if you don't know, it means you don't care. I think that for everyone, companies, governments, we need to join up, and we need to join up how we look at issues and how we resolve problems. And I think the final thing, I think in much of the world, COVID and the response to COVID showed us what was possible when there was a true sense of emergency behind it. And we need a bit more COVID-like emergency to the topics we're discussing today.
Yeah. Very well said. So my call to action is that first you all wear these, and you're going to get them in just a minute. These, my panelists, these are the intersectional thinking tool that you have climate and gender. Let's see, I hope we're getting a photo of this. We have climate and gender together at all times, and when this session is over, we have a pair for all of you. And basically come join us at the Climate Resolute Coalition and learn more. Thank you all so much.